Hey everyone, Rhythm Railroad here. I'm doing a short video, well as short as possible, on a technique that I kind of came up with myself. I'm not sure if anybody else has used this thing before, but I always have a problem with trying to figure out how to bring the slope down to a lower level. Meaning the track is raised, the main line is raised on most of my layout, but I like to have my facilities, for the most part, come down in height so it looks more realistic. So I got to get this track to basically come down to about, I guess 1% is what it would be, or a little bit less. But it's enough to make problems with, bending of track and being slightly sideways, or, the couplers grabbing at the tracks and things like that. So I came up with this little thing, and it's worked very nicely before on my other section. So I know that I'm not going to have any problems with it. It's a little sloppy, but I've learned to kind of get through it a little bit better every time I do it. So what I'm trying to do here in this particular situation is, this is the upper level. I'm trying to bring that spur out to this facility. And I've already kind of mapped it out with my track work. But what I'm trying to do first is try to get this kind of lead track and turnout in place. But as you can see, I'm just kind of putting it here. As you can see, there is a gap under here that I have to get rid of. So we can get a little closer in here. So what I'm trying to do is get rid of the gap, but at the same time, the tricky thing is that I want to make sure that this turnout is glued, especially in this area here, because this has the most I guess coverage, or the most ability to glue down at that point. Like, I always throw a little glue on the back too, but what the problem is that this is lifted and this is not. So I'm trying to basically create a platform so that the entire section can get glued down. So, this might be common sense to a lot of you, but to me, it's something that works nicely. Obviously, what you need to do is create some kind of a stiff bed for it, but at a slope. So you can't really do that with cork, because, it's hard to grind down and things like that. So I figured the easiest thing to manipulate is just styrene. So this is just a scrap piece of styrene. I just cut out. It doesn't even need to be straight, I just cut it out to size. And it's just basically to create some kind of platform. And then you could always work around it with dirt and mud, and everything's going to be sloped anyway, and ballast and stuff. So there's no need to be perfectly aligned with the track or anything like that. So I'm going to show you what I do. And if it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, okay. But it works for me. I've already pre-wired the frog, because these are electrofrog, and I've done everything, all the alterations that I need to do, with the exception of cutting the gap right here, which I can do at the end. But I've already jumped the, I don't know if you can see that, I've already jumped the tracks, because that's the best way to do it, at least in my opinion, to get power to these points here. And then, obviously that's going to short circuit, and that's why you have to cut a gap right in there, so that the power only jumps from here to here and here to there, and not across to the other section. Anyways, so that's already all set up. I've also soldered this piece of track here so that I can manipulate it without it falling apart or coming off the rail joiners and things like that. Then what I went ahead and did is I pre-cut this, like I said before, and I also marked where it's going to land, basically, where it's going to sit. This way I'm not guessing when I have to actually put it down. And as you can see, the blue line that I marked here is way off to the side, because this is going to be probably covered by the time I'm done with this process. So here's what I do. I take basic plaster, like joint compound kind of stuff. This is I'm trying to get in the camera here. This is the, all-purpose sheetrock, basic stuff. And I'm just going to take a little bit of that And I'm not using any special tools. This is just another piece of scrap styrene. And what I'm going to do is put a layer, like a pretty thick layer of that stuff, kind of in line with where the track is going to go. This is the part that you have to be kind of patient with. And the only thing is, you got to try to keep it off the other track and the ballast and stuff like that. So give yourself a little room. But what I'm doing on purpose is making it a little too thick. So obviously higher than the track is going to go. And the reason for that is because what I'm going to do is take that styrene, and I'm going to basically push it down on top of this plaster to create a perfect slope the way I want it to land. Put a little more here. But again, you want to try to keep it within the blue lines for the most part, because if you go out too much, what's going to happen, it's going to want to go through the rail joiners on the track, because those parts won't be covered by the styrene. So, you know, that's when you start getting into sloppy stuff afterwards. You have to clean it. I mean, I did do that before, and it was annoying. Like one of my first ones, I did that, and the plastic pushed right through the rail joiners and the ties, and it was just a nightmare trying to clean it up. I did, but it just, you know, it could be so much easier the other way. So now, what I take is the piece of styrene, which I already kind of cut an angle in it. Sorry, I'm trying to get the camera angles here. I already cut an angle here just to kind of match where the road bed is here on this side. So I'm just going to plop it on there, and I'm going to try to work it slowly. First, just to be flat, not necessarily, you know, in the perfect slope yet. So, and then, you know, what I'm doing is I'm just taking any excess here and putting it where I need it. So I need a little more in here. Just kind of shoving it in there. So just like that. It takes a little, you know, a little practice to get it going, but once you do a few, it's very easy to manage. So then again, I'm just going to start little by little visualizing it the way I set it up originally. Trying to get the right angle here. You know, you could always wipe a little off if you need to. Just have a paper towel around so you can wipe your finger. Otherwise, it gets very messy. So right now, it's actually on an upward angle right now, because I'm working the plaster out. But what's happening under the styrene is that it's spreading, so it's evening, making everything nice and even under there. Now the difference between using this versus, you know, styrene parts is that this will get you the perfect angle, because you're just using the weight of the track and the angle that it naturally wants to take, rather than trying to stick little pieces of styrene under there and it's all, you know, choppy, and then sometimes you have some low points and whatever. I mean, if that works for you, great, but I found this to be kind of easy to do and more effective. It's just more solid. So as you can see, there's a lot of excess right now because I'm still kind of working the stuff out. So I'm just gonna again take this little piece of styrene, just clean it up a bit. There's no like technique, there's no like perfect science to this. It's just get rid of it. I try to do my best to get it as close as I can, but even if you have, like right here, there's a little gap, that's not gonna matter. So I'm just trying to work this stuff away. Like that. Again, it's better to have too much than too little, because you could always trim it, just like I'm doing here. It's always gonna be pushing out the sides as you work with the styrene sheet. So You know, right now the idea is that I want to get it down. That hole is where the frog's going to be, so I want to get it very close to the bench work at that point. So right now, obviously, it's too high. It's way too high. So now I'm going to start kind of pushing it down a little bit. If I can get this point to be pretty close, then this lump here is going to work itself out later. Once again, you want to get this part especially as clean as possible, because that's what wants to push through the ties. And now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of eyeballing the angle of this thing. Little by little, just kind of working it downward. And once, you know, as you go through it, check both angles. Check that it's flat, both this way and this way, because you don't want it to be, you know, leaning either. So I'm kind of, you know, at the angle that I'm looking at it right now, it's a little easier than probably what you see on the camera. But as you can imagine, you know, once we get this right, you know, it's going to be leaning exactly the way you want it to. And you're not going to have a lot of, like, you know, stuff sticking out the sides or random styrene, you know, pieces jetting out or anything like that. So right now it's looking pretty good. I think I need to come down here a little bit more, because this has to be even lower. And what all of this is also going to allow for, which I kind of mentioned before, is it's going to create a gluing surface for both the track and the turnout. You know, with the turnout, you don't want to glue in the parts that are moving, so you only get a little piece here. And I avoid this area here. I just basically glue from here that way. So, you know, you got to be careful with where you put that glue down. Okay, so this is looking much better. Again, I'm just cleaning up the sides here. Just, you know, you don't have to do this. You could actually, if you really want to, you can let it dry all sloppy and then trim it later when it hardens. But I feel like when it hardens, then it's a little trickier to chip away at it. So I'd rather just do it now. And I'm actually, with my finger, creating a little bit of a slope. So it's almost like the same slope that you would achieve with roadbed, with like cork. It's got a little slight angle on the sides. That's what I'm trying to get here. So now when you get ready to put the ballast down, it's going to have that nice natural slope. And of course I could have taken the time to make it, like I said before, perfectly lined up with the track, but I don't think it's necessary. Can't see it at the end anyway. So I think we're pretty close. Now, here's the tricky part. You have to try to get the track on there. I'm just trying to wipe my hands down. You got to try to get the track on there so that you can see the exact angle. So let's see if that's going to work. Also, you know, try to avoid getting the plaster on top of the styrene so you don't create a mess for yourself. But the tricky part here is trying to get it into the joiners and not pushing down on the styrene, because that's the angle you need. Now here's the thing, this is not reversible. So once you push down, you can't lift back up again. So you have to do it from the first try. So what I try to do is try to push down evenly so that I'm not bending the track, but rather keeping that angle down. And I just thought of something that I could probably do to make this even better. Take a piece of wood or something, you know, something that's going to be stiff, so that you can get like something like this, so you can get the the middle of the track to not bend. So now when I push down on this side, what's going to happen is it's going to push down on this evenly so that the angle is going to be just right. So again, you want to put the pressure on the front, not in the rear, because then what's going to happen is you're going to create too much of a dip in the back. So once you get that, I'm pushing pretty hard down here because I want this to be right at the point where the bench work is, pretty much. So, again, I'm looking at it from this angle, and I don't see any gaps between the track and this file, which means that it's perfectly pitched to that ending point. And sometimes, I sometimes learn more by shooting videos because I'm forced to not just do it, but think about how I'm doing it. And that's exactly what's happening right now. I just thought, I have never done it this way, so I just thought, hey, if you're watching this video, you're probably going to want to figure out how to avoid any dips or any gaps like that. So why not do it this way? So now, you're always, like I said before, you're always going to get a little excess plaster coming out the sides. So now that we have it in place, like, I'm pretty happy with that angle right there. I'm just going to look at it from the other side. Yeah, it's leaning a little bit like this way, so I'm going to push this side down a little more, all the way through. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it looks much better. And again, this is not reversible, so whatever you do, make sure you're not pushing too much from this side, because you're going to make it too flat. So that's really lined up right now. So now what you do now is you remove the track. As you can see, I got a little plaster coming through the ties, but this is not really glued down yet. So remember, all we're trying to create here is a gluing platform here. So I'm just going to shake this out so it doesn't pull the styrene off, and then just pull the track work out. I can always clean the plaster that I got on there off because it's not permanent on there. And then I'm going to just trim the edge here, make all that excess plaster by taking my very expensive tool here, this piece of plastic styrene that I was showing you before, and just kind of shaving it all off. And again, if you get something on top, just try to wipe it off lightly. You might even use like a damp paper towel or something, just to make sure that you don't push too hard. Because when plaster is wet, it comes off much easier. Just don't overdo it. Don't put too much water on there. Let's look. I'm pretty content with that. A little piece here. That looks pretty good. My hands are a mess. I'm just gonna get a paper towel. One thing that I found about working with plaster is that you gotta constantly be cleaning your hands, because the stuff gets everywhere if you don't clean them. There's a little bit here, down on top, a little bit here. And the other thing is, if for some reason you don't realize you got some on top, once this hardens, you just sand it off. It's so easy, and it comes right off when you sand it. So I think I'm gonna leave it just like that. Take some of this out, just like that. So let me see if I can get an up close perspective of this here. Got my handy dandy selfie stick that's not great, but it is what it is. So now that when I'm looking at it from this angle, I'm gonna smooth that out a little bit more on the left side. But as you can see, this is a pretty flat platform to work with. Back out a little bit. And I'm trying to show you the angle here. It's hard to see on the camera, but the angle coming off the turnout. Now, there's a little gap here, which I knew it was going to be there, like between where the cork ends and the styrene begins. That is going to have to be just a piece of styrene that I just shove under there. But that'll be a tiny one, just to kind of bridge that gap there. But that's easy. So what I'm going to do now is just let this dry, and then we'll be ready to glue it, paint it, sand it, whatever we need to do. And once we get the turnout in place, then it'll be much easier at the benchwork level to lay the two tracks that are going to come into the industry. One's going to be, you know, for loading and unloading, and the other one's going to be a switching track, like a little siding here. Not a siding, but a little extra track here, so that the empties can be moved over or whatever if need be. I always like to have options. All right, so I'll see you in a minute, or in a minute for you and a long time for me. Once this dries, we'll go to the next step. All right, so now that the track is glued in place, not going anywhere, and absolutely flat without any gaps under there, I have a nice smooth slope on the way down. It's pitched the right way. Now the next step would be to connect my two tracks that are going to lead to this facility. Obviously the main track would be the straight track here, and then the diverging would be the storage track or the switching track for any moves that need to be made. This way you don't interrupt the main that much. I should have made this track a little longer, but I was afraid I wasn't going to have enough track here for the two box cars that are eventually going to live in front of that facility. But it's fine. It's not a busy track anyway. This is supposed to be a short line up here, so I'm okay with that. So here's what I've done. I basically cut the track length ahead of time and installed the plastic railer here and the metal here, because this is where the frog's going to be connected. And since I'm running electrofrogs, you have to isolate the inner rail so you don't create any short circuits when the frog's polarity switches. So this would go here. I'm not going to attach them permanently yet because I want to glue them down. And I just wanted to show you what it's going to look like eventually. So something like this. And that's going to basically, once I move the facility forward, it's going to hold two cars, 50 footers, right in front of the loading platform. And that's how I gauged the distance and the track length. I always go a little bit longer on purpose, just so that I could always trim it off later, but you know, this allows me a little room to put a bumper here, end of the line bumper, and here as well. So I'll even them out once I'm done gluing them and putting them in place the right way. All right, so when I come back, these are going to be lined up and they're going to be glued down. The only thing I do now is, you know, I'll install them real quick, and then just take my pen and just draw the track shape, and that's just for gluing purposes, so I can get my glue as close as possible to where the track's going to be and not get it all over the place. So I'll be back for that. All right, we're back. So now everything is glued down. These tracks are not going anywhere. They're solid. I made sure that my turnout is actually working. It's free, working perfectly. And I checked the rail just to make sure everything's running smooth. So there you go, that's one. And I always check everything at high speeds, because even though you're never going to run your trains that fast, at least if you want realistic operations, you know if there's going to be a derailment, it's going to happen at high speeds. So if you can run it fast, you can definitely run it slow without a problem. So there it is. And everything lines up nicely with the platform and with the tracks being parallel. So now the next step would be to power them up by installing feeder wires to each one of the tracks. I also have to power up the turnout. I like doing it this way. Some people install their power wires first and then they drill holes, and that's fine. I find that that's harder in the end, because you're trying to line up 3 holes with wires that move, and you're bending, and sometimes they snap off. So I just drill the main frog wire, which is the hardest one to get in, and then the other ones I do afterward. So I either connect them here to the sides of the turnout, or right to the beginning of the turnout here. It all depends on what situation. So in this case, since I have the plaster and all that stuff here, it's probably easier to just go here. Either way, this track's going to carry the power to that jumper. It's going to feed it through either way, so it doesn't matter where you put it. And then obviously, since I'm cutting a gap here and the inside is insulated, I do have to put power to these tracks separately. So I'll probably feed those from here, or I might just do it here, this way they're closer to the other ones and I could just tie them in. But either way, I have bus cables going through the bottom, so it doesn't matter where I put them. It's just easier to just go to one spot rather than opening up 2 spots on the bus. So yeah, everything's working great. The only other thing I would have to do after I solder the wires in is also solder the rail joiners, just to make sure the conductivity is going through, even though I'm getting power anyway separately. But it's just nice to have that. And then all I got to do is spray paint the camouflage brown just to weather the tracks. And then from that point on, it's basically just all scenery. Everything should be functioning. Obviously, I'll check with the locomotive to make sure that I have power running to both tracks all the way through. And in a situation like this, some people might say, well, why are you even bothering with a powered, anything here, since it's just going to be cars being delivered? Well, because if it's just one car and the locomotive is pushing it in, the locomotive needs to make it all the way up to here, or this, or here in that case. So I do like to have the option of having the power to the track, because even if I don't use it, at least I know it's there. The only thing is that it gets a little expensive because, I'm using a frog juicer, because I'd rather have the smooth transition through the turnouts rather than having to depend on the actual leaves of the turnout to carry the power over. So with the frog being powered, it's so much smoother. And basically everywhere on the layout is set up that way. I don't have any on-powered frogs anywhere for that reason. So obviously I'm going to have to hook up the frog juicer, the Tam Valley frog juicer, to the power for the frog there. So I have to figure out where I'm going to get that from. I think I might have one more slot left from the other stuff below and from the other side of this panel here on the upper level. So I'll figure it out. All right, so I'll see you in a little bit. We're gonna drill some holes and put in some feeder cables.